When most of us picture Vikings, we imagine roaring warriors in longships, shields gleaming, sails filled with wind. But behind the battles and the legends lay something just as fascinating: what these seafaring people actually ate. The Viking diet was not just food, it was survival, culture, and even power. Imagine yourself in a Viking settlement at dawn, the mist rising from the fjord as smoke curls from wooden longhouses. Inside, families gather around the hearth, their meal not lavish, but hearty enough to fuel lives of labor, exploration, and war. Their diet was strange by modern standards, built not on luxury but on whatever the land and sea would give. In a world of cold winters and harsh terrain, every bite carried the story of survival. Grain was the foundation of Viking meals, though it was rougher and earthier than the bread we know today. Fields of barley, rye, and oats waved in the northern winds, harvested by hand and ground into flour. From this, women baked flatbreads on hot stones or in clay ovens, dense loaves meant to last through long journeys. Porridge was another staple, thick mixtures of grain boiled with milk, butter, or even beer, filling bellies before a day's work. Yet Vikings added strange twists, sometimes mixing onions, turnips, or dried herbs straight into the pot, creating meals that were part sustenance, part experiment. Salt, rare and precious, was used sparingly, while wild honey sweetened what little treats they enjoyed. For a Viking child, the taste of honey was a glimpse of heaven in a world of salt and smoke. But what truly set the Viking diet apart was their relationship with meat and fish. Hunting and farming alone could not sustain them, so they turned constantly to the sea, their eternal companion. Imagine fishermen rowing into dark waters, pulling up nets heavy with herring, cod, and salmon. Fish were boiled, smoked, or dried on racks to last through bitter winters, their sharp smell filling the air of every settlement. Meat came in bursts of abundance: cattle, sheep, goats, and pigs slaughtered in autumn when food was plentiful, then preserved with smoke or buried in salt to last the long dark months. At feasts, roasted meats were skewered over open flames, fat dripping into the fire while warriors cheered with horns of ale. But on lean days, meals were far stranger: dried fish soaked in sour whey, animal livers boiled with herbs, even sheep's heads roasted whole, eyes and all, considered delicacies by some. To the Vikings, nothing was wasted, every part of an animal had value, every scrap was life. And then there was dairy, perhaps the most surprising pillar of their strange diet. Milk, butter, and cheese were produced in abundance, though their flavors were far from what we know today. Butter was often rancid, deliberately fermented for a sharp taste that many found revolting, but to a Viking, it was strength. Sour milk was common, stored in wooden casks where it thickened into strange, tangy drinks. Even whey, the leftover liquid from cheesemaking, was treasured. Sometimes, it was used to preserve meat, other times, it was drunk on its own, a sour tonic that fueled sailors on long voyages. This reliance on dairy gave Vikings resilience, but also left them vulnerable. Poor harvests or sick animals could mean hunger for entire villages. And yet, they adapted, turning hardship into tradition, until strange foods became beloved staples. For the Vikings, diet was not just about feeding the body. It was about facing the cold, taming the seas, and holding communities together around the hearth. Every meal carried with it the taste of survival, and the strange foods they ate shaped not only their lives but their legends. Feasting was at the very heart of Viking life, and it revealed the strangest and most symbolic parts of their diet. Imagine a longhouse lit by flickering torches, smoke curling through the rafters, warriors and families gathered on benches beside long wooden tables. The feast was not simply about food, it was about honor, community, and showing wealth. Roasted meats filled the air with a rich scent: pork, mutton, and beef, cooked slowly over open fires. Whole animals were sometimes brought to the table, the choicest cuts reserved for chieftains, while common folk gnawed bones and scraps. Yet even in this abundance, nothing was wasted. Animal blood was collected to make thick sausages, organs were boiled into stews, and bones were cracked to suck out the marrow. To modern tastes, such meals might seem strange or even grotesque, but to the Vikings, they were symbols of respect for the animals that sustained them. Alcohol flowed as freely as food, and it was central to the Viking way of life. Mead, brewed from honey, was prized as the drink of the gods, golden and sweet, carrying both warmth and intoxication. Ale made from barley and flavored with herbs was the everyday drink, consumed by children and adults alike, since water was often unsafe. At great feasts, drinking horns passed from hand to hand, filled with strong brews that loosened tongues and bound warriors together. Yet drunkenness was not without risk, arguments could spark into duels, and some sagas tell of men drinking themselves into disgrace or death. Still, the act of drinking was woven into ritual. Toasts were raised not only to comrades but to gods like Odin, Thor, and Frey, each sip a prayer, each gulp a promise. A Viking feast was not just nourishment, it was a performance of loyalty, courage, and faith. Rituals of food also extended into sacrifice. At seasonal festivals like Yule or harvest gatherings, animals were slaughtered in honor of the gods. Their blood was sprinkled on sacred sites, while the meat was shared among the people. Eating together was more than survival, it was a communion between mortals and the divine. In some ceremonies, horse meat, normally taboo, was consumed in sacred feasts to invoke the strength and fertility of the animal. The strange mingling of the sacred and the everyday defined Viking food culture. The same cow that gave milk could be honored in death with a feast, its body sustaining life while its blood fed the gods. But not all Viking meals were grand or sacred. On long voyages, warriors endured rations that would make most modern diners recoil. Barrels of dried fish, sour milk, hard cheese, and flatbread were loaded onto ships, washed down with ale that soured quickly in the sea air. Salted herring or dried cod, tough and leathery, might be softened in water before being chewed. Sometimes, food spoiled, forcing sailors to eat rancid butter or fermented fish that stank so strongly it could make stomachs churn. And yet, they endured, because these foods carried energy enough to row for hours and survive weeks on open water. Hunger stripped away delicacy, leaving only what the body demanded. For a Viking raider, even the strangest foods were reminders of resilience. Feasts and voyages, rituals and hunger, all of it wove together into the strange diet of the Vikings. Food was not simply eaten, it was shared, honored, and turned into a story. Around fires, over horns of mead, or at sea with dried fish in hand, the Vikings carved their culture in every meal. Their diet was as harsh, resourceful, and wild as the world they lived in, and each bite was another step in their endless battle against hunger and the elements. As the seasons turned and the long winters closed in, the Viking diet revealed its most desperate and unusual side. Farming in Scandinavia was never easy, the soil was thin, the summers short, and the cold relentless. Crops of barley, rye, and oats had to be carefully stored, for a poor harvest meant hunger for the entire village. Root vegetables like turnips, onions, and cabbages became essential, hardy foods that could survive the frost. But even these could run out before spring, leaving people to rely on what little was left in their storehouses. Imagine families huddled in dim longhouses, smoke thick in the air, sharing bowls of watery porridge stretched thin with whatever herbs or scraps they could find. Hunger taught them ingenuity, and some of the strangest preservation methods were born from necessity. Fermentation was at the heart of Viking survival. Fish and meat were often buried in the ground, left to rot slowly into pungent, sour delicacies. While the smell could sicken an outsider, to a Viking it was strength stored beneath the earth. Fermented shark meat in Iceland, though infamous today, has its roots in these traditions, food that seemed more poison than meal, yet one that carried the promise of survival in lean times. Dairy, too, was preserved in odd ways. Sour milk, clotted creams, and curdled whey were not thrown away but eaten, drunk, or used to preserve other foods. In the darkest months, when the sea froze and hunting was scarce, these strange flavors were often the only things standing between a family and starvation. Trade and raids also brought exotic foods into the Viking world, blending the strange with the familiar. From southern lands came spices, walnuts, figs, and even wine, treasures carried back by merchants or stolen from raids. For chieftains, serving such rare foods at feasts was a mark of wealth and power. Imagine sitting at a long table where smoked fish and sour milk sat beside figs and almonds, a strange clash of flavors that told the story of Viking ambition. Food was never just fuel, it was proof of connection to the wider world, a symbol of wealth, or a memory of battles fought across distant seas. Even in death, the Viking diet carried meaning. Archaeological finds reveal graves where warriors were buried with food for the afterlife. Hunks of meat, loaves of bread, and horns of ale meant to sustain them in the halls of Valhalla. To eat was to live, and to live was to fight, so food was bound to both survival and eternity. For the living, every meal tied them to the gods, to their ancestors, and to their own legends. Eating strange foods was not a matter of choice but of identity, a reflection of who they were and what they endured. When we look back at the strange diet of the Vikings, it tells us a story beyond taste or tradition. It is a tale of a people who shaped their meals out of hardship, who turned scarcity into invention, and who made food into ritual, power, and memory. From rancid butter to roasted feasts, from sour whey to honey-sweet mead, their diet was as fierce and enduring as the Vikings themselves. And though the flavors might turn our stomachs today, for them, every strange bite was a victory against hunger, against the cold, and against the vast, unforgiving world they called home.